Hello everyone, this is Umair Qureshi, the UQ, with my wonderful colleague and friend co-hosting this wonderful program, Tammy with me.
Hello.
Hi, how are you, Tammy?
Good, good. How are you?
Tell us who is with us quickly. I'm really excited to talk about
I
a
know.
lot of things today.
I know a lot of things to talk about.
Yeah.
Hi, Krista. Welcome
Hi,
to the show.
I'm
Everyone,
this is you.
Thank you. I know that you are busy, so we're going to get right into it. I'm going to introduce you, though. This is Krista Leh. She is a fellow emerging leader. However, she's a bit senior to Umair and I. She is class 2012, but she began her career in about 20 years ago as a high school social studies teacher. And then after 10 years in the classroom, she served as 5 years as an instructional technology and curriculum coach. That's a lot. That's a mouthful. And working with 36 teams on curriculum design and development, and working to integrate technology into the curriculum. Krista now has developed or co-developed a student leadership organization based on peer mentorship and mediation after serving. Krista is also an adjunct professor in a Master of Education program that focuses on social emotional learning, which we are talking about today. And she is expecting, and she will, earn her doctoral degree in educational leadership from Lehigh University this year. So you have nothing to do. You haven't been doing anything for the last 2 decades.
Learning and connecting.
Yeah. So
that's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Yeah, so many things going on and lots of amazing learning along the way, I'm sure. So your area of expertise is social emotional learning by way of a few areas, which we'll try to fit into the conversation. But can you tell us a bit about how the definition of social emotional learning that you use within your work?
Absolutely. So social emotional learning has been a really nebulous topic in education and really hard to define. It's been around for thousands of years, though. And so most recently, it's been called values clarification or character education. And so even 10 years ago, it was referred to as social emotional learning, but not a lot of people understood what that meant. Generally and broad-basedly, they would talk about relationships. And so the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, which is an organization out of Illinois, really started developing some strong research, a meta-analysis around what is SEL. And so they defined SEL within 5 different components. The first is self-awareness. So are you able to understand your own emotions? Do you see your own strengths? Do you have confidence in yourself and self-efficacy? And then that moves into self-management. So what do you do when you have these emotions? And are you able to manage those? But then are you able to motivate yourself? So the first 2 parts have to do with more of the intrapersonal pieces. And then the second 2 pieces are social awareness and relationship skill building. So are you able to see empathy in other people and take their perspectives? Can you appreciate and value diversity? And then what do you do to build and then maintain relationships over time? And then the 5th one has to do with responsible decision making. So identifying problems, analyzing them, being able to make ethical decisions that are going to be best for everybody involved. So I define SEL within those 5 different competencies, and it's from Castle.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So much information just listening to you, and like having some background just working, with a whole child approach to education, but there's just so much knowledge to have to be able to work through this approach well and deeply and meaningfully with students and educators. So my head's already start spinning a little bit.
If I can add, you mentioned about the whole child. And so my work within ASCD, they talk about the whole child, where all the children need to be healthy, safe, engaged, supported, and challenged. And the adults as well. And the way that I sort of look at how those 2 interact with each other is that the whole child is how we provide an environment for students and adults to develop their SEL skills. So I imagine whole child is how we develop that environment where people feel healthy, safe, they are engaged, they are supported so that they can be challenged to grow. But the social emotional learning pieces have to come from the inside out. We can't force anybody to develop them. They have to own that process, but we can set up the environment for that to happen.
Yeah, makes sense. And it sounds like something that should just work naturally, but it doesn't always. So it takes a lot of work.
It definitely
Thanks, though, for clarifying. and making that connection to the whole child piece from ASCD. So what led you to your work with social emotional learning?
So I didn't end up wanting to go into education originally. It was supposed to be sort of a backup for me. But I became a social studies teacher, and I realized how much I loved working with the teenagers and hearing their stories and building a rapport with them, a healthy, safe, respectful rapport. I got to hear all the different types of things that they were dealing with outside of school and outside of cognitive learning. I became the coordinator for the SAP program for 6 years, it stands for student student assistance programs. And so we would help get students who are experiencing barriers to learning support. So students who had mental health issues, drug and alcohol, tobacco, other drugs. And so 1 year in our school of 1,100 people, we had 220 referrals, which was enormous. Something's going on. And so from that, we decided to, instead of being more responsive, to be more proactive. And that's where we applied for a grant and got the student leadership. We got money to create that student leadership opportunity. So we were pulling students from very diverse backgrounds, from all of the grade levels, races, ethnicities, socioeconomic statuses, and diversity in terms of what they were interested. So not everybody was captain of the football team or head of the band or involved in clubs. It was people outside of school. So as long as they had any type of leadership. And so that's when I started really learning about social emotional learning, and we connected with an outside resource. His name is Tom Stecker. And over the last 12 years, he's been my mentor. He's been like a second dad to me, and has really just taken me under his wing and helped me. And now we're at a point where we work together. And so we balance each other really well. But he introduced me to social emotional learning about 11 years ago.
Wow, that's awesome. So just thinking about all of that work, I wanted to find out where your ASCD connection came from. So was your SEL work first, or it sounds like, because it's been a process. So then how does ASCD and all of that fit into that work?
So we really felt we had something special with our student leadership organization. We broke it out over 3 years so that it increased in complexity. The first year we focused on developing the student leadership skills. And then when they were ready, they moved on to a year where they expanded into the school system and kind of were bridges for their peer groups. And then in their third year, their senior year, they would expand out into the community and the other schools. So I happened to be on Facebook, and I saw something about an ASCD conference in San Francisco, which I think was in like 2011. So I submitted to share what we were doing on the student leadership organization and got accepted. So it was my first time in San Francisco, my first time even really getting involved with ASCD. And I just was blown away by the experience of being surrounded with 10,000 to 15,000 other educators. And so I started following them, and I saw an Emerging Leader program, and I thought, never going to happen, but let me just see where you have to give it a shot. And so I tried and was one of 26 people and met some of my best friends in this program.
That's amazing. I love how the work with the students led into you creating this huge network that you have now through ASCD. That's so incredible.
You never know what opportunities lie ahead.
Yeah, for sure.
That's wonderful. That's really amazing. So, Krista, before we move on to the next question, let me tell the audience that we are again here in a wonderful topic. We're discussing on a wonderful topic that is integrating social emotional learning, bringing equity to life. And if you want to watch our previous shows, you can go to YouTube and watch all the episodes. And in every episode, we get wonderful educators like we have Krista. And I remember how I met Krista first time. We met in Atlanta in 2015, I guess. We both presented an Ignite presentation, and that was awesome. Me, Krista, Barry, Jason, Fred was also there. Yeah. So yeah, that is great. And ASCD is doing a great job, bringing all those wonderful educators from all parts of the world and connecting them. So having said that, Krista, you are a specialist of social emotional learning. How does this look like at an individual level?
That's a great question. And I think that with its rise in popularity, it's almost becoming a buzzword that makes me nervous a little bit, but I'm still very excited that it's gaining a popularity and people are having a better understanding of it. But there's lots of programs that come out there that say, oh, buy this program and you can implement social emotional learning. But the truth is that that's not the way that it works. On an individual level, you have to own social emotional learning, and you have to prioritize it. That's something that's important to you above all else, and that it's something that you're going to model for your students and with other colleagues and reflect on continuously. So I always say social emotional learning is not a program. It's who you are and what you do every day. And as silly as this sounds, like I think of those 5 core competencies multiple times throughout the day. And I'm not always good at it. We're human, right? And so we mess up, but then it's what do I do with it after that? And how do I try to, maintain those relationships and grow as a person? And so I think that what it looks like on an individual level is that you're constantly growing, you're modeling, you're reflecting, and you're trying to walk the talk that you're putting out there for people.
Okay. So before I move to another, super intellectual question, I just one question. It popped into my mind. Okay, let's come very hard on social emotional learning. So if you come to me and you say social emotional learning is awesome, equity is great, and consider me as a very naive kind of teacher who is following the traditional methods, I simply say, I'm not paid for social emotional learning. I'm paid for teaching. How would you respond me? I mean, how would you convince me?
Mm-hmm. So I think that's another great question. And that's the current reality right now, is that you have a section of the population who gets it. And generally, in my experience, and I've worked in 25 states over the last 10 years, it's generally the elementary school teachers who see how that's a natural fit. As you get into middle school, they're seeing it too. But by the time you get to high school, many of the teachers are saying, it's about the content. I need to prepare them for the next thing in life. And so my response to that is that teaching and learning is social and emotional. And so there's lots of quotes around students don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And there's a lot of neuroscience around the idea of social emotional learning. And so Dr. Paul MacLean, even in the 1950s, said that we have 3 parts of our brain. And so back here on the lower part is our reptilian brain. And that's where our fight, our flight, and our freeze are. Are we hungry? Do we have to go to the bathroom? Are we hot? Are we cold? Are we in a safe place? And then over top of that goes our limbic system. And so that's where, for those who work in middle school, all the teenage hormones start coming out, your amygdala. It's like they refer to that as your puppy dog brain. So am I safe? Am I loved? Am I valued and accepted? And then over top of that is your neocortex. So that's where your higher level thinking, your creative thinking, your cognitive thinking, and your language development happens. Many times in education, we try to push down from the top and like cognitive. But the problem is our students' neurons, whether through trauma or through specific experiences, they are working in that reptilian brain or in that limbic system. They're firing, and our brains are meant to be efficient. So if we're firing all the time down here, they're not accessing their higher level thinking. So my encouragement would be that we've got neuroscience that says you need to meet students' social and emotional needs. And so often you may have heard Maslow's before Bloom. And it's not to say that students in trauma or in different contexts can't achieve at high levels. They can. But often it's because they have external support systems that are happening at the same time. So looking at, it's not our students don't come to us with these skills. So they don't come into high school and it's like they magically know how to do all this. And neither are us as adults. It's a continuum that we constantly have to learn and grow in. And I find that the people who are most resistant to it, it's often because it takes a lot of deep reflective work, because you have to model it. So that means you need to become really self-aware. You need to be knowing how to manage your own emotions and how to motivate yourself. And it's easier to deflect and to do that. So when people say, oh, it's the touchy-feely stuff, it's the warm, fuzzy stuff. If you're doing the work, it is the hard stuff. It's more difficult than the content pieces a lot of the times. And so I usually start with the facts and the science for people who think that it's a warm, fuzzy, don't want to get into the feelings piece. The other thing I would say is that a lot of times we just say it's about relationships. And so that scares people too. Like, where's the line for relationships? And if you look on Castle, they actually give a set of descriptors within each of those 5 competencies. So the things that I mentioned earlier, like knowing your own emotions and self-motivating and growth mindset, managing those emotions, appreciating diversity and empathy, problem solving. How do we not want our kids to have those skills? So whenever I've given that list to educators and said, what don't you think is important for our kids to know? I haven't had anybody say, I don't want them to know how to become self-aware. So we need
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So Krista, how do you begin to make this shift in mindset, thinking, and behaviors, moving from the individual to supporting an entire school staff in making this potentially really big shift from a heavy academic focus to a whole child way of thinking?
That's a huge question, by the way.
Yeah.
How much time do we have?
It's a huge shift as well.
Let me see if I see if someone even wrote. That's a great question.
It's an intellectual question. Yeah.
No pressure at all.
Nope.
No,
And
no
that's okay. This is what I do, so I'm okay
Oh,
with that. So it can happen when I work in my classes with the teachers working on their master's degree. Change can happen from one individual person within your classroom. You're affecting between 20 to 150 students every single day. And so you can model the way for them in your classroom. And then you pull a colleague or two along with you and you start a revolution, you start a movement. And that could take time. One of the ways that I also work with districts and county schools is that we start from the administrative piece and work our way down. And what we found seems to work best is that first there needs to be a cohesive vision around social emotional learning. A colleague and I just did a research study around SEL implementation. And what we found is that there's a lot of districts who purchase programs and start up different clubs and organizations and just say, this is what we're doing. But there's no SEL vision to make it cohesive. And so they're putting out all these resources, not knowing if things are aligned or if they're overlapping. The other thing, so I would say we want to have a vision, and then we want to have a common language around that vision where you start getting stakeholder investment. And I wrote down a couple notes here so that I wouldn't skip over things. And then the other piece of that is, what are your non-negotiables for a socially, emotionally, and academically inspired learning community? And so something might have to give unless you're willing to spend the time to integrate it through everything that you do, which can be done, but it does take time. Then we need to start looking at what professional development opportunities are you offering to your staff? How are you modeling the way for them? And when I say the staff, I also say that we start with the administrators. And I usually work with them for about a year until they feel comfortable with it and they're modeling it for their staff, so that when they finally come around to saying, you know what, we need to do this with our students, the staff are feeling safe, valued, accepted, included, and part of that. So they actually feel what it is so that they can replicate it. We also need to make sure that we're giving our staff not only the PD, but the resources to help them be successful and time to reflect and to talk to one another. So much in education is about creating systems, a system for curriculum. We need to do the same thing with social emotional learning. There has to be some cohesion there, and we need to work on getting people invested and on board. It takes time, and so it's a matter of toggling between having a sense of urgency, but also understanding that we need to have patience because it takes 3 to 5 years for sustainable change. And when I work with the educators, we say we need to have one eye on care and one eye on challenge, because we want to care for somebody to, as Vygotsky says, the zone of proximal development. So if they're learning something new, like social emotional learning, we need to give them the supports so that they'll take that step to become better at those 5 competencies and more capable. So we need to be able to toggle back and forth with our staff as well. How do we care for them and then help them stretch and grow so that they can do the same thing for their students? So going back to where I said there were lots of schools that were just kind of throwing things out there. They weren't necessarily being monitored, so they didn't know if it was actually happening. They spent all this money, and then they weren't evaluating the program to see if it was actually working. So that concerns me from a point of view financially. Like, are we wasting human resources? Are we wasting money when there could be a better way of looking at this if we take a systemic approach and then put all those pieces in place to ensure that it's doing what we want it to do, and that our students are growing in those 5 competencies as well as our educators.
Yeah.
Did I answer that well?
That was a lot of information, but a lot of really good information.
And it's
stunning.
Steps and it's time.
Yeah. And so
that makes me think of, a big paradigm shift you have to tackle with the administration, The schools and schools do have missions as well. So when we say that everything is designed around the mission statement, where SEL fits in, and how SEL, and do we mean that SEL is only for the students or it is for the teachers as well? So frameworks and how the things work on. There's a lot of work. I agree. A school that decides to come on SEL will surely will need 5 to 7 years to completely get onto the board.
Yes, and I think that sometimes that's difficult because we have administrators who come and go, and so it's hard to create a system of something. But I think you hit on an interesting point here, that it needs to be inclusive of the whole district and that we're aligning everything, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it looks the same everywhere. So that's been a really interesting, it's not a challenge, but a challenge in terms of people understanding that they're all working towards the same vision, but because of what might be happening within their situation, their context, or with the different student needs that they have, it might look a little bit different for everybody. And that's okay. There isn't a one size fits all.
So then within that, because you have been talking a lot about the changing the system basically and it's organizational. So within that kind of top-down approach, but of course at the same time you want teachers doing that with students and not just waiting until admin is ready to do these things. So what are some of the practicality or the practical implementations that you work with people so that they can start creating systems that are sustainable? And I know that's a big question again, but
it is a big question, but it's a really important one. And so it comes down to what routines do we have established within the school system. And so for a teacher, I say we think in terms of classrooms, and maybe we need to start thinking in terms of learning communities. And I learned that from Tom Stecker, that it's not just us teaching, it's a relationship that we have going on in that classroom. And what is the cycle of group development so that everybody feels included and valued in that process, and that you see it as if you follow Cogg's ladder, talks about the cycle of group dynamics. And so how do we make sure that each of our classrooms is seen as a social, emotional, and academic learning community? And so for me, it comes down to having healthy, safe relationships with each of the people that come into contact with us, and understanding that we're modeling for them all the time. People are always watching, and so we need to make what's implicit explicit. And so my older son came home one day and was like, my math teacher doesn't teach. All she does is put us into groups and give us stuff to work on. I'm like, oh, really? Okay, so let's talk more about this. And I said, it's different when you're having an opportunity to work in groups with people, solve a problem, be able to negotiate and communicate with one another, instead of her standing up on the board telling you how to do things. So she was working on relationship skills and social awareness and responsible decision making, and then how you responded to that process. If only she would have been more explicit about it, and she might not have made that connection. So a lot of our teachers are doing this already. And so are we giving our students an opportunity to think about what are their social interactions that are helping them achieve the academic goals? What helped you while you were working towards this academic goal? In what ways did maybe you hinder the process, or what actions were taken that hindered the process, and what can we do differently next time? I think too that we get so focused on kids coming in and out of our room, at least from a high school perspective. I would have up to 160 students a week. So by Wednesday, I would go through all my class lists and check off who I had some sort of one-on-one interaction with. And then I spent the next 2 days ensuring, like, hi, how are you doing? How have you been? If somebody's been absent, welcoming them back and saying, I'm glad you're back. We missed you while you were here. Instead of just assuming that their needs are being met, because I think one of the worst things that can happen is that kids come in and out of our rooms and they don't feel acknowledged.
Yeah.
Sometimes even just taking a couple minutes at the beginning of class, like I know you guys have been going all day long, let's just take a minute to breathe and to relax a little bit and to reflect. And to give kids an opportunity, and adults an opportunity as well, to get to know one another in a non-academic way. So when I'm working with staff, I'll sometimes give them a story and ask them, like, when was the last time you felt brave? And share that with somebody sitting next to you. And that small act that could take 3 minutes actually addresses all of the 5 competencies in various ways. And so how are we letting people get to connect with one another and to know and grow, to feel part of a community?
Yeah, exactly. I'm just becoming aware of the time suddenly, and we have just another few minutes left. So you kind of addressed a couple of the questions that I had, those practicalities, but within that you addressed some of the advice that you would give to teachers who are just starting that out. So, you know, you're going to start with those gestures of just greeting kids and checking in with them. Any other just quick little bits of advice?
I would say that understand that you're part of this journey as well. And so you're going to make mistakes and you're going to lose your temper, or you're going to miss something. But I think part of it is just saying, you know what, I'm a human, I'm a person, I'm working on these skills too. They're lifelong skills, not something that you ever say, I've mastered self-awareness, I'm done. You know, I'm an expert in social awareness, I'm finished now. We're all works in progress. And there was a quote I saw on Facebook the other day that said, we can be both a masterpiece and a work in progress at the same time. And I think that that's brilliant. I also think that if we say that they need to be, they're sequenced activities. So if you look at the SEL standards, going from kindergarten through 12th grade, there are consistent themes, and I believe I have them up on my website, but I'll make sure that I post them in a comment section here, that grow more in complexity. So sometimes we expect, like people say, well, why aren't my middle school kids empathetic? Well, they have to develop being able to take perspective first and then become compassionate before they can get to empathy. And so we are looking at it in a sequenced way. And also we need to give kids an opportunity to practice these skills. So I can't stand up in front of a group and say, this is how you be more empathetic. I need to give them situations to try it out. But then I need to have a conversation with them if they don't make the best decisions. So I think that kind of goes into a discipline issue, but looking at restorative practice, for example, instead of saying, you know, you made a bad decision, you're out of my room, we need to pull kids in closer and say, let's talk about this decision and where it came from, and let's see what we can do differently next time. And so it really does, when you're thinking about SEL and you have it on the core of your, like the front of your brain all the time, you start to behave differently because it changes the way that you think.
Sure. Yeah.
That's great. Very comprehensive. So, Krista, I have two more questions, and we do have a few minutes. What are some of your own go-to practices to ensure that you are addressing social emotional needs of adult learners that you work with?
I listen. And this is something I work on often, because when I find something I'm really passionate about, I feel like I want to talk all the time. And so I need to remind myself to listen more to where other people are coming from and try to understand what are some of those barriers that they're experiencing for why they feel that this is maybe not important or why they can't do it. But then along with that, I think at some point I need to help people realize that we're admiring a problem, and that part of my role is to help them overcome that and build a bridge to a solution, right? So hearing where they're at and then saying, I'm here to support you through this process and we can make it to the other side, and how they can build a network of support to be able to do that. I also think that what I learned is that it has to be experiential for them as well. So when I'm going out to work with groups, adults, administrators, superintendents, we're up and we're moving around. We're doing experiential activities, hidden path, hopping through things, group juggle. But that's how you take a fun learning experience, and it's the way that you process it and debrief it, and we connect them all to social emotional learning skills that are good for them to grow in and to become more confident in.
Right. So, Krista, as you mentioned that it will take 5 to 7 years for a school to come up to SEL standards and really implementing the whole child philosophy. My question is actually that, okay, fine, let's think about a school which is up for it. What do you think? Should they bring reforms in their policies? Should they bring the change in their primary school first, then the secondary school, then the higher secondary school, or they should bring it at once on everyone? That is first thing. Second thing is, what kind of professional development do you suggest to the teachers who would want to become an SEL advocates and SEL teachers in the classrooms? And the third thing is, if you have certain frameworks,
you might need to repeat these.
So 3 things. I will remind you these 3 points again if you forgot any one of them. So first one Should it be brought all at once for the whole school, or it should be a step-by-step thing?
Can I answer that one first?
Yeah.
And then,
go ahead.
because I know my brain. And
Okay.
so it would seem like you feel like you need to start at the elementary school, but that's not true. You can do all of them at the same time. And in fact, I would say you want to do that because you don't, this is where we have to toggle between that sense of urgency, but that patience. And the research shows from Castle, their meta-analysis, that it doesn't matter what grade you started at. Even for us as adults, we can still learn and grow. And so I would say you want to start where you can. But you don't have to start it at kindergarten and wait 12 years until your seniors start getting it. It can start all at the same time. And it is tier 1. So it's for every single student and every single adult, not just students who you think need that extra support. Okay, now I'm ready for
it. Okay. The second thing is, what kind of professional development the teachers would need to execute SEL in their classrooms or being head teachers in their community? Because when I talk about my local circumstances, yeah, there are a lot of professional development programs going on, and most of them are episodic sort of workshops. So the thing is, as our friend, the great Fred Andy says,
yes,
the professional development that sticks, not sucks. So the thing is that actually what kind of professional development those teachers will need to start and kickstart this thing.
So I think we need to start small but think big, and have them understand through activity how easy it can be to start implementing this. Even just a question that you're asking people to talk about is a beginning piece. Don't need to jump to the standards right away and talk about how we embed standards, because that's overwhelming. But if we are a little bit more explicit about why we do what we do and giving people opportunities to process social interactions so they can see the connection of social and emotional with their cognitive growth, I think that that's essential. And so the professional development also needs to be really clear with what social emotional learning is and what it's not. So one of the districts I've been working with, even after 2 years, some of the administrators were saying, okay, wait, so we need to make our students and our teachers happy. I'm like, no, that's not social emotional learning. First of all, you can't make anybody happy. That's not your job. But happiness is actually Dr. Barbara Fredrickson talks about happiness is actually an amalgamation of 10 different emotions. That's not your job. But what your job is to help people understand their emotions and how they can leverage those emotions for success. They also would say, we need to take stress away from our kids. I'm like, no, that's not SEL either, because there's good stress and bad stress, and good stress can help move us forward. So it's about educating, having a different perspective on things, and keeping those 5 competencies in mind, but helping our teachers as they deconstruct all of this along the way. And giving them time to talk about it and to reflect on what they're doing and what worked well and what they're going to keep. I would also recommend that look at what your practices are and put them within an SEL framework, because I guarantee that you're already doing pieces of these. Just find what's working and do more of that, and then find other people who are doing new things and add that into what you're already doing instead of thinking you need to reconstruct a wheel.
Yeah.
So the last part of the same question is, if you
Part
know
36.
yeah. So the last part is, if you know any frameworks, like what I think of teacher evaluation frameworks,
Yes.
and the 2 famous ones are the Charlotte Danielson, and the other one is Marzano's. So both are amazing. Both are wow. So if the school is going to apply some frameworks for teacher evaluation who are going for SEL as well, what kind of framework should be followed?
I would, and there's several different frameworks that are out there. I would still recommend that they go back to Castle, and it's CSEL.org. It talks about the 5 competencies. And one of the things that we found in our research, by the way, is that a lot of schools were focusing on self-management, on relationship skills like anti-bullying and responsible decision-making. But they were not putting as much emphasis on social awareness and self-awareness. And so as we were digging in deeper into the data we collected, we were finding that schools were going more for compliance as opposed to awareness. So we're having kids who are, here's the rule that you need to follow, and this is what you need to do, without having the thought process about why it's important. So I think that is an essential component that needs to happen. And you'll see that through Castle. And then they also say through CASEL that you have these 5 competencies, but then schools can't do it alone. We need to expand. So it goes from the classroom to the school to the family and the community. So eventually we need to figure out, how do we build capacity? And this also helps since it takes 5 to 7 years. 3 to 5 is really quickly, but 5 to 7 to really expand and to be sustainable, that we need to build capacity and get more people on board, so that as time shifts and as people shift, it's still sustainable. And students are having similar experiences in the classroom, in the school, in the home, and in the community. So we all need to be a part of it.
That's great. That's great. Tammy, you have to say anything?
I have a lot to think about, and just, that was a lot of information, really, really great information to share with people, and just hearing your research and the information that you have has been helpful. And I'm sure our viewers have found it really helpful as well. We'll post up the casel.org website, and if you want to post your website as well.
Absolutely.
And if you have any book recommendations, we can pop them in the comments as well.
Sure.
I'm sure you have tons.
Well, I know we had talked about that part. Right now, I would definitely recommend Brene Brown's Dare to Lead. She is a fabulous grounded theory researcher who looks at compassion, vulnerability, empathy. And the Dare to Lead takes all of her other books and really puts the essential pieces and how to take action together. I've also been listening to, just recently, John Maxwell's Leaderships. And so from a leadership perspective, I'm really appreciating what he's saying in terms of how do we manage, or how do we lead a movement. And then lastly, what next book on my list is Paul Zach's book on trust, the neuroscience of trust. Because you can't have a healthy, safe relationship or rapport if trust isn't there. And so that has been a book that's been recommended to me, and his last name is Z-A-K. So that's next on my list.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
I got a lot of things from you today. And, every time when I meet a new educator, you are not new for me, but there's a lot of information for me.
Yeah.
Every time I just feel that I'm in a wrong profession. But then I just tap my back and I say, oh, fine, it's okay. It's okay. We are going to learn more.
We're all learning together.
Yeah.
That's
what we do.
Of ASCD and our community is that we can all leverage each other and learning together.
Really
That's right. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Krista.
We're running out of time. Yes, Tammy?
Yeah, no, I was just thanking Krista and just reminding everyone that Ed Talk Live is a joint partnership between Pakistan ASCD and the Emerging Leaders affiliate. So thank you, Amer, for inviting me on the journey to be your co-host. It's been a lot of fun talking with different educators so far. And we have a huge lineup coming up. We're scheduling people through September now. So I remember booking this with you, Krista, thinking, oh, it's weeks away, but it just arrived so quickly.
But it has been such an honor to be on here and to talk with you both. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you for joining, and I hope we will be meeting very soon, either on Leader to Leader, or we are for sure coming for the Empower 20.
Yeah, I'll do it both of them.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. We are going off air.
Thanks, Krista.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Bye.
You too. Bye.